bipartisan prayer breakfast. I believe it's in the 73rd and 74th year. It is hard to get a bipartisan prayer breakfast now, which has been a norm in the past. People would usually see common ground around the love of Jesus. But many Democrats look it out. Many of our Republican colleagues are voting, and they see this as immoral. Why are you balancing the budget off of the poor? Why are you balancing the budget off of those that are losing their health care? Why are you balancing the budget off those that are losing their housing? Why are you balancing the budget off of those that are sick to give to the rich? That's immoral. So there's a theological problem in this institution as well. As Mr. Trump embraces the Christian nationalists. So we have to figure out, like, what is the substance? So I think it's a very hostile environment. There are some members that are affable and congenial, and there are others that are very much, off-put and very much distant. I think but that starts at the top. It starts at the head. That we're living in an unprecedented time. There was an insurrection attempt 4 years ago. There was an election denier 4 years ago, and that spirit still permeates this institution.
A lot of the discussion has been on how do Democrats get out or not get out their message, but you just invoked and mentioned that Donald Trump has embraced Christian nationalism, billionaires, and that there is a very concerted hard-right movement in this country at the moment. You come from a family, obviously, that has done a lot of work to create a rainbow coalition of sorts, a progressive coalition. Where do you see the state of that movement today when it comes to the values that you espouse?
I think the progressive movement and the rainbow and the coalition is only growing. That the demographics are there, the priorities are there, and I think the Democrats, in the words of Hakeem Jeffries, we win the seats, and the Republicans win the court cases. So you look at 3 Democratic seats that were lost in the state of North Carolina. That wasn't because of our vote. That was because of gerrymandering and how they moved around districts. So the numbers are on our side. When you look at almost 4 million people, Black and Hispanics, having moved into Texas in the last decade, and not one new Democratic seat, not one new African American district was carved out, that's because of what's happening in Austin with the Governor Greg Abbott. So demography is part of destiny, and voter suppression was the real winner in this last election. Look at the people that got knocked off the rolls. They got their votes challenged. And so people did come out, and there was an unprecedented amount of votes that were denied because of new voter suppression techniques.
The South is obviously famously the blackest part of the country, but has long also been the place where, as you say, voter suppression and other policies and tactics have taken place. So demographics don't necessarily mean that translate into democracy. Where and how are you all in this moment thinking and strategizing about how you can take the demographics that you just described and turn it into a movement that, if it doesn't seek power, then seeks justice? What does that look like in this moment after the Trump win?
Well, let me pivot. One thing that we're going through now is we're seeing a partisan Supreme Court. We are seeing 2 Supreme Court justices three Supreme Court justices we can always count on doing what's right. 4 can be center right in the middle, and 2 in Justice Alito and Thomas. They're going to vote wrong every time. And so the court is stacked at the current moment. It's not looking out for the interest of all Americans. They're even capitulating to the whims of President Donald Trump. The second part I would tell you is it's just not all the Democrats. Unfortunately, elections have consequences. We have to look at the 77 million people that voted for Donald J. Trump. Is this who they wanted? Is this what they really voted for? And I would tell you no. There's a myth that most federal jobs are in Washington, D.C. Only 20% of the federal jobs are in D.C. Most federal jobs are out across the countryside. Now people are asking about, well, what about the CDC? We have a bird flu vaccine issue. What about food insecurity? What about Medicaid that delivers 40% of all the babies in the United States of America? I mean, now people realize these guys are cutting at the bone, but their budget is immoral. They are taking from the most vulnerable people and then giving it to the wealthiest people. The Trump 2017 tax cuts favored the top 1% income earners. They said on average maybe $500 went to most people and 60,000 on average went to the wealthiest 1%. It's an immoral budget. He is now fighting at a fervorous and frantic pace to try to extend this tax cut. Why the hurry? Why is he not letting the Senate and the Congress do their job? According to the United States Constitution, we're supposed to determine the budget. Why is he saying that he is the arbiter and he and the Attorney General are the ones that get to define what Congress and what the law is? That's not true. And I think it's really a sad day in America when the senators won't stand up and do their job. I mean, they've given him the keys and the power, but the good news is 100 court cases are going on now. Courts are striking this down. Thank God we've got a strong state court system. You can't do mass firing of federal elected officials, of federal employees. So he's gone too far. We appropriated the money for USAID in the 118th Congress. He was not a part of that. He doesn't have the right to stop the flow of those funds for malaria, for HIV, for the food aid. It's just wrong. But the senators won't stop him. So thank God for the state courts that are putting the brakes on these mass firings. And many of these these federal workers are going to have recourse. And I think in another 30 days, I give him 30 days. And from the outset, I said he has 60 days to go down this pillage and damage that he's doing before people are going to start hitting the streets in massive numbers. And I think now that we're around day 45, as we go up into March 14th, when he has to raise the debt ceiling and then ask for people to get cut past the muscle, past the bone, to go into the bone marrow, that people are feeling it all across the country. The cost of insulin is now going back up, that Joe Biden has done a great job with. America's less secure now. We've now started a trade war. The cost of our everyday goods is going to go up, from avocados to strawberries to produce that's coming out of Mexico, from gas and oil and timber that's coming out of Mexico. Why is he picking a trade war with our closest trading allies and our best friends? 40% of what we trade goes to those two countries. So why is he picking a fight? And people don't understand it and don't like it.
Absolutely. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on the Department of Government Efficiency. You just described all these mass firings.
Yeah.
How is that specifically affecting your district, and how would the budget that you just described and the continuing resolution, the big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump is calling it, how would that affect your district and your constituents? If you also like to chime in?
Sure. I'd love for Dr. Price to weigh in on this. I don't want to legitimize it and calling it a Department of Government Efficiency. It has not gone through the Congress. I don't even know who pays these people. Okay? Every member of Congress and senators has to fill out what is called a PTR, a personal transaction report. We have to disclose our assets. We have to take an oath of office. We have things that we have to do as a check and balance. Who is paying these persons? Have they taken an oath of office? Have they been given a security clearance? Like, who are they working for? Do they have any conflicts of interest? Are they shorting the stocks of the contracts that they're canceling? Are they trying to enrich themselves by making more contracts with the Tesla Corporation? Are they trying to, with FAA, give contracts to Starlink? There's no transparency. Why fire all the independent inspector generals? Let them do their job. We have a system in place. It's not perfect, but we understand it. It can work. He is out to demolish it, and it's not clear on why. So I would appreciate it if whatever this third party, and it's not an agency because it's not come to the Congress. Where is it housed? What are their email addresses? How can you reach them? And Mr. Trump says Musk is in charge of it. Then he says he isn't in charge of it. It's the most chaotic thing that you've never seen before.
Just on that point, some of your Republican colleagues have said that they know how to get in touch with Doge, or that Elon has met with them and discussed with them how to get in touch with Doge. And some of them have said, well, my Democratic colleagues can speak with me about how to get in touch with Doge. Have any Republicans reached out? I know the senators have been saying this in a way where they're like, well, they're not. It's not public, but I can talk to them. Are your House colleagues doing that? And just what is your view on this kind of like, well, the Democrats and Democratic lawmakers and Democratic governors can go through Republican governors or Republican
Right.
lawmakers
I would like to say what they're doing is not telling the truth, but more specifically, I like to say they're telling a lie. Like, that's not their right. I don't need to go through them. I'm a federally elected official. I should be able to talk to this quote unquote agency head that's not appointed by Congress, that's not gone through any committee myself. I don't need to go through them. That's not how the system works. The last part I would tell you on that is these mass firings. Why are they going? If you want to talk about government efficiency, why don't we hire accounting firms? Why are we hiring hackers? Why are they hiring someone that's 26 years of age that says he was a racist before it was cool to be a racist? Why is Mr. Musk doing these troubling salutes? I mean, why are people that are white nationalists being emboldened across the country? Why is Mr. Trump pardoning people that were violent towards police officers and killed officers right here up on the Hill? They say back to blue, respect law and order. And now he's become lawless and has created disorder. So I think everything they're saying about Doge, whatever it is, who appointed it, that's not the president's responsibility to create. The Mr. Thune of the Senate ought to step up and take control of the agency that he's in charge of, that his constituents put him in. So I'm very disappointed that they've not shown more courage. On the Democratic side, on the Republican side, they are not showing the character to stand up to this man that they know they disagree with. Look at Secretary Rubio's face. You know, it said it all the other day. I felt bad for him. I'm just wondering how long before he resigns. I mean, like, how do you get a person in the less qualified, what's that, General Brown of the Joint Chiefs? How do you get a less qualified person than the, what's his position?
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. You get a man that's retired that doesn't have the pre-qualifications to become the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and you put him over someone. And this last thing I'll put on is DEI, which is simply meaning anti-diversity, anti-black, anti-civil rights. I mean, that is drawn around some racial lines and around the most vulnerable people, and people ought to call it out. Members of the Senate and the Congress ought to have more character and ought to stand up to Mr. Trump. These are great programs. No one less qualified took a job from someone else. That's some old race-baiting language that I thought we had moved beyond, but apparently we haven't. It's come back. That's Jim Crow speaks. Jim Crow is alive and well on Capitol Hill. I give you a headline.
I want to get you to. I give you a headline. Yes, thank you. I want to get to some questions on DEI and civil rights that I asked some of your colleagues earlier. But before that, I would love to
Yes,
hear
please.
your perspective, Doctor.
Can I get you a water or anything?
No, thank you.
How these on how the so-called Department of Government Efficiency and other efforts by the Trump administration and the Republican Congress may impact your the work that you do in the Chicago school system.
So first of all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to share, particularly about what is happening at Chicago State University. And you know, it's not about what is going to happen, it's what has already happened already. So thus far, we have lost $1.6 million in federal grants that we use to help educate our students, support our students, bring equity in higher education. The $1.6 million that we once had, no longer have, has to do with the students in the College of Education, realizing that we provide educators in some of the schools that are most vulnerable. The teachers that we graduate are those that have a sense of understanding and humanity, humility in working with students from economically and socially impacted backgrounds. And so not only students in the College of Education, but also in our College of Health Sciences and Pharmacy, where we look to educate more nurses, more pharmacists, OTs, public health workers, and so the resources that we lost makes it incredibly difficult to support students, to provide those kinds of wraparound services. At Chicago State last year alone, we had $30 million in grants. And I think with so much happening in Washington, D.C., there's a level of trepidation that exists among our faculty who are researchers. Almost 40 of our full-time staff are funded by federal grants. And what does it mean if those grants are jeopardized, that we no longer have funding? It means not only that we're unable to support the students that need the kind of scaffolding resources the most, it also means that among staff that are in those positions to support our students, they're not in those positions anymore. And so we're concerned about what it means. We're concerned about the anxiety and stress that these changes are having on our students, many of whom come from environments where first generation, 61%, Pell eligible, almost 90%. Yet, despite those realities, harsh realities, we rank in the top 4% of economic mobility among our students. Chicago State educates at the top 4% of all students getting degrees in physics. So we're changing lives, right? And not only the life of the student, but future generations and communities. And so what you do to our students, oftentimes the least in terms of economic and other kinds of inequities that have impacted their communities, it's a perpetuation of those inequities. So it's a time of great uncertainty, but also we're feeling the effects. A university like Chicago State, a predominantly black institution where almost 80% of our students are African Americans, and then you're losing 1.6 million, that's profound. The students that we could assist, we're feeling the impact. And I know we're just beginning to feel the impact. So we're concerned, and we need to come together, not only for PBIs, but all minority serving institutions. This is a time for solidarity, to help support each other, to stand together, to not be discouraged or disheartened. But what I love about Chicago State is, against all odds, we will ensure that our students are educated. We will ensure that we will not miss a beat. We haven't figured it all out, but there's a level of resolve that the president and I have to serve the students, because our students go out and they positively impact the community. First district, Congressman Jackson's district. And so I'm privileged to be here. I'm blessed to be invited, Chicago State invited, and also to give voice to some of these critical issues impacting our students. So that's why we're here.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, and thank you for allowing us to give voice to these issues, to illuminating what's happening, not only at Chicago State, Southside Chicago, but really throughout our country. The anxiety, even among our elders, senior citizens that are wondering what will happen to them. So we're in this together. But we as a black people, we have gone through so much in our lifetimes, and while we are anxious and worried and concerned, we're down for the fight, because we've been fighting our entire lives.
Final question. I would appreciate your perspective on the state of DEI and civil rights here, where the Trump administration has made clear in its appointments in the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division specifically there, that they see prosecuting DEI as a top priority. Obviously, this is an animating force in their political movement. And what they seem to be focused on is as I posed to your colleagues as well, a reinterpretation, if not a rescinding of traditional civil rights law, and they want to use civil rights law and their interpretation of it to not just outlaw DEI, but potentially other civil rights, traditional civil rights protections. As a lawmaker, what is your view on that policy? I don't want to presume how you feel about it, but or would you like to, push back against it in court? Would you like to, argue against it in the streets? What is just your reaction to their legal philosophy on this? And then as a second part to that, when they present that argument before the Supreme Court, as it is likely to be presented, and the Supreme Court were to come to whatever conclusion, what does a civil rights act that you all in Congress would craft look like for the 21st century if the legal doctrine for the civil rights protections we have now are undermined or reinterpreted?
So I'm glad you asked that. I'm proud to say I, along with my colleague Congressman Cleo Fields and Congressman Sylvester Turner, we have just founded a DEI caucus as members of co-equal branches of government of the members of the House of Representatives. DEI, diversity, E pluribus unum, out of many we are one. It's a value. Equity, equality, the 14th Amendment is founded in 1868, that you came into for the protection of African Americans after the 13th Amendment, after the abolishment of slavery. Inclusiveness, persons that are differently abled, people that have different abilities from wheelchairs or others, that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a value. It's an aspiration. It's not a law. I don't know how they can outlaw someone's aspiration, someone's goals. If a corporation chooses to have these principles, these American principles, to bring, to increase their shareholder value, to use their right to have freedom of speech, I don't know how the president can outlaw someone's freedom of speech and someone's aspirations. That's why I find it highly insulting, and this has been simply used as race bait to symbolize not just dog whistle, but a foghorn to say no blacks, no civil rights legislation, no push for equality, no push for inclusiveness, no push for an American value of diversity. Let's be clear, this land is founded by genocide off the blood of Native Americans. This land is founded off of Africans that were kidnapped and brought here. This land has become, if you will, a coalition, a group of people that have come here for greater aspirations. So it's a land of high aspirations, and we have to understand our history, then we have to look forward. This is a tool for us to look forward. It's an American set of values. That's why I'm proud to say I stand for the spirit of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. Respectfully, Congressman, they are not just using rhetoric now. They are arguing in court that the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and the 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 are in conflict with diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, and that any effort to, support communities of color or disadvantaged people is in fact reverse discrimination. They are arguing this in court as we speak, and they say that they're going to go after companies that are doing that. So it's not just a rhetorical, we don't want to do this. They're going to take this argument to the Supreme Court. What, as a lawmaker in this body, what conversations have you had in this new DEI caucus or in this Congressional Black Caucus, Democratic caucus, with your colleagues across the aisle with Republicans, have you had about that legal argument?
So we have not had that legal argument yet, and I would tell you this started in the Students for a Fair Admission June 29th, 2023, when they specifically cited when they took to the Supreme Court Harvard University, founded in 1636, the nation's oldest private institution, and the University of North Carolina, founded in 1789, the oldest public institution, and they cited the 14th Amendment, signed in 1868, and said now this was reverse discrimination. So I'm very clear on what the law that they're using, and that was a law, how ironic, that was created for the protection of blacks, to guarantee our birthright and our citizenship. So I look forward to it coming to the United States Supreme Court. And it's still a contradiction in that the military, a branch of government, is able to use an affirmative action policy, but not the public and the private institution. So I hope they do relitigate this. And why would they make an exception for the military academies to have affirmative action? That still stands, that you can use it in the military, but you can't use it in the public and private sector. So I raised the question, does that mean you can use it at FAA, that you can use it, if you could use it at Department of Defense, can you use it at Department of Education? It makes no sense. It's a contradiction that they're standing on. So unless they want to get rid of it at the Department of Defense, which is still on the books, I think it needs to be further litigated.
And let me just hop in real quick as counsel. This is settled law. You can go back to the Michigan cases from the early 2000s. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor created voluminous case law on this fact that we had different levels of scrutiny when it comes to the interpretation of restorative laws. So if something is meant to restore previous wrongs, that falls under strict scrutiny. Then they have intermediate scrutiny and then low scrutiny when it comes to the use of racially restorative measures. These laws have been on the books since the 1930s and 1940s. None of this is new, and the reason they're relitigating it currently isn't because the law has changed. It's because conservatives have spent the last 15 years stacking the courts in their favor. When Ms. McConnell was blocking Merrick Garland, it was with the auspices that in future years they will be able to overturn Roe, overturn affirmative action, overturn the entirety of the civil rights movement. The difference between Dr. King and Jesse Jackson when it comes to the civil rights movement is their ability to move laws, to change things. It's not just about rallies, it's not just about marches and protests. It's about putting that legal framework in place if you compare them to other leaders throughout history. The fight in court is going to be whether or not, as the Congressman said, the Supreme Court justices, as are currently constituted, will continue to execute the law and abide by stare decisis and precedents, which has led to court for the last several hundred years, if you want to go back to English common law, to the Star Chamber, until today, or if we're simply going to say that court precedents is only going to be another political machination and whoever's in charge is whoever runs the law. And that will be the battle that this caucus prepares for.
I appreciate that. I guess I'm getting at that with some of my questions. Is the essence of what I'm asking here is the litigation will go where the litigation will go. I'm asking you as a lawmaker, a legislator, a person who creates the laws. That I'm not asking you to predict what happens in the Supreme Court. Like, that's up to the 9 justices. I'm asking you, after whatever happens at the Supreme Court, after whatever those arguments are made, are you having conversations with your colleagues about what to do next? Should the Supreme Court uphold the Civil Rights Act and say that, as all the precedent shows, that the current legal regime should just be left as is? Whether they say, actually, we're going to expand the legal regime and say that DEI is legal and we should have the most expansive understanding possible, or if they're going to overturn it, what can you do?
Right, let me be fair with you. Give me part 2 of our conversation.
Okay.
What he's done in the first 43 days has been overwhelming. I was here on January 20th when he signed 78 executive orders. And this is what Mr. Steve Bannon said they were going to do. They were going to shoot with muzzle velocity. They were going to flood the zone. They were going to come on so many laws on day one. So we've dealt with this man defying court orders. There's 100 lawsuits that have been filed. There are federal workers that are being kicked off in mass hiring, which is unlawful. He's had major setbacks. As a member of Congress, I've not been able to go to the Consumer Financial Board. I've not been able to go to the Department of HUD. We're being locked out of office buildings. So I look forward to hearing his remarks tonight. I look forward to following up with you. I'll be glad to tell you once we do our press conference, do our launch officially. We've got over 20 members that have signed up.
A DEI caucus?
Yes, of the DEI caucus.
I'd love an exclusive, obviously.
I'd
love the exclusive, obviously. So.
Yeah, so I'll be
You
glad.
get my information. And on the members' point, the differentiating point between the DEI caucus and other initiatives within the Congress that are working on these issues is primarily that it is legislative focused. 1865, we got freedom. 1965, we got rights. The first generation of Americans who were born with full rights as African Americans, Congressman Jackson's part of that generation. And so when we're looking at these issues, it has to be a generational fight. It's not as if these things are going to be turned back in 4 or 5 years. If you look at the battle over Roe, it took 50 years for them to overturn that. The Civil Rights Act in 1965, it's been nearly 70 years for them to overturn that. So what the DEI caucus is doing is putting together the legislative gravamon that will be necessary so that when Democrats do return to the majority, we can push these things outside of being an executive order by Johnson in 1965 or 1966 that can be overturned by the strike of a pen, or we're going to write that into law, and that will be the primary focus. If you look at nations like India, where Ranswani is from, South Africa, where Elon Musk is from, Brazil, they have diversity, equity, and inclusion enshrined in their constitution. So eventually this has to work its place to when we enshrine into the U.S. Constitution that these are the values that are immutable, not simply something from an executive order, but that every state needs to ratify and that we abide by as a nation.
Absolutely. Well, I'm vaguely obsessed with this topic at the moment as VP's Race and Democracy reporter, so
Yes.
I kind of see it as the, like, half my beat, and I'm up here on the hill for the next 2 years, if not longer, so would love to continue this conversation.
No, let's do. And we'll give you some inside scoops, some other stuff. We're going to do a big press conference. I've shared more with you than anyone up into this state, so
Okay.
you got a window to the world.
Appreciate it.
And you got myself.
We'll be in touch.